Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Today we've got Ray Fittipaldo on. Aaron Rodgers has been the quarterback that has seen a few head coaches leave during his time in the NFL, and some people have tied the reason for that to him. Could that ever happen this year with Mike Tomlin? We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the Steelers wide receiver coach being excited for Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson this year, and Danny Smith talking about the new kickoff rule in the NFL, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers writers, and as always, you can find us here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this episode is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They help you when you're injured in an accident, but they also help you with workers' compensation. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, this topic, of course, didn't come up with us at minicamp, but it has been something that's been kicked around in the national media. It has been something people have wondered locally. And when you look at the history of Aaron Rodgers, I don't think it's all that illogical to at least wonder about this possibility. But Aaron Rodgers, of course, last year, you know, the clip of him looking at Robert Salah, kind of like, you know, giving him the side eye, and then the week later, just a few days later, Robert Salah was gone from the Jets. You saw how Mike McCarthy was departed from his time with Aaron Rodgers in the Packers. There's some who think that maybe this could be the year that Mike Tomlin's job is actually in jeopardy because Aaron Rodgers is with the Steelers and because he has that history. We're going to delve into several different aspects of Aaron Rodgers that could play into this, but just over a broad stroking view, or just like an over top view, how likely do you consider that an actual possibility for the Steelers to see if Mike Tomlin's job could be in jeopardy with Aaron Rodgers being his quarterback?
You know, before he signed that 3-year, $50 million contract extension last summer, Chris, I used to play this game, but I used to play it with assistant coaches, like he kind of went out on a limb when he hired Matt Canada with no NFL experience. And I said, listen, if this doesn't work out, maybe this is something that would lead to the Steelers parting ways with Mike. Well, that didn't happen. Even though Canada's tenure ended in a disastrous manner, that did not happen. So then you play it forward. Okay, if he doesn't get it right with Arthur Smith, then maybe that could do it. But I don't even know if his fate is tied to Arthur Smith after he signed that extension last season or last summer. And I'll say it about the quarterback too. I think it's an interesting way to look at it because Aaron has had some, let's face it, some run-ins with Mike McCarthy in Green Bay, and then of course Robert Salah with the New York Jets last season. But you know, for the Steelers to walk away and have to pay Mike Tomlin, you know, $30 million,
Right.
You know, if they want to part ways with him after this season, I just don't see that happening. But I will admit it's an interesting new aspect, new perspective, you know, sort of a lens that we could look at it through this season if things do not go well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we are only a year and 6 days removed up from that extension that he got that keeps him through the 2027 season. So we're talking about 2028 is when the actual contract would be up for Mike Tomlin. And you know, we know the Steelers, they don't get rid. It's hard for them to get rid of coordinators and assistant coaches in the middle of the year. When they got rid of Matt Canada, that was a huge, you know, change. I just don't see this. I also think that on top of all of that, like the Rooneys and their spending practices and how they do coaches, I have to think that even like Aaron Rodgers even acknowledged he's more of a servant leader with the Steelers. He's not coming in to dictate everything, or at least that's what he says. He's not going to have the weight in Pittsburgh that he had in New York. Like, you know, and he's not the several time MVP quarterback for the Steelers that he was for the Packers, where when they got rid of McCarthy, it was because they wanted to get a younger coach who could maybe do something different with Aaron Rodgers and get over the hump with him there. He is a 1-year quarterback, unless they agree to another, like a one more year. There's not a scenario where Aaron Rodgers is in Pittsburgh for more than 2 seasons. And again, 2 seasons is a stretch. And so I find it hard to believe that there would be any sort of cutting of Mike Tomlin by the Steelers over a guy who they know was there for 1 year. And they essentially said, like, hey, this isn't the year for us to be in to really open up the window. We want to go get a young quarterback. I do think this is the year to help set up a window. I just don't think this is going to be a year for that kind of weight to be put on Mike Tomlin. Now, I think that part of what has protected Mike Tomlin is you have never seen his team crumble from the inside out and like point fingers everywhere. And, the leaders be like, I don't know about this guy. That's like at the end of every season, his guys have had his back. His locker room has believed in him. And that's been part of why I think the Rooneys have been have stuck with him, much like why they stuck with Bill Cowher through his rough years.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you look at this from Aaron Rodgers' perspective, he has a lot of incentives to play nice and to make this work this year. He's not playing for his legacy. I mean, this guy's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's won a Super Bowl, 4 MVPs, but he does want to end his career on a better note than what we remember from his Jets days, right? Like his first season with the Jets ended after a couple plays. He had the torn Achilles. Last year, they were 5-12. The coach is fired. There's chaos there, and a lot of it, let's be honest, kind of stemmed from what went on with Aaron and the coaches and, some of his teammates. So, I think that's fair. But if you look at it just from a 1-year arrangement, Aaron needs us to work. The Steelers need us to work. I think he and Arthur are going to try to make it work as best they can. Hey, listen, Chris, this can go in a number of different directions. Stuff can happen. But I think given the situation for both the team and the player, I think they have more reasons to make this work than for it to go haywire.
I'm right with you. Like, because again, like they're not. This is the team that won 10 games last year, 10 games the year before that, with Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and like I'm not saying that Aaron Rodgers is still anywhere near his MVP form, but he at least brings to the table, like we saw him. He still has that quick release. He could still, do the bootleg rollout thing. His body has not given way on him, at least from what we could see, right? And so unless like there was a quick aging at some point this season where you saw, oh, he can't get the ball out, like kind of like how we saw with Kirk Cousins, last year in Atlanta. Unless that happens, I think he's going to give the Steelers the best quarterback play that they've probably seen since Ben Roethlisberger was not an old man for the Steelers. So if that's the case, I find it hard to believe the Steelers are going to fall off that hard, if fall off at all, in 2025. And so, again, like I know someone's probably thinking like, oh, well, what if they go without another playoff win and even though they make the playoffs? That's not going to change anything. It hasn't changed anything. They've been in the playoffs 4 of the last 5 years. They haven't won a playoff game in 8 seasons. But the Rooney's have expressed they're willing to be patient, and I think that they signed Tomlin to a 3-year extension because they wanted to give him time to kind of figure out how to get through this process, find their next quarterback, and then see where they're at in 3 years. So I'm right with you. I don't think there's any sort of likelihood that Aaron Rodgers ever becomes the reason Mike Tomlin is set out of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and just going back to Roethlisberger, even think about Roethlisberger's last season or 2. I mean, you could even take it beyond the 21 season if you want to go back further. No semblance of a running game. Aaron Rodgers now with this offensive line, hopefully rounding into shape, the drafting of Caleb Johnson, finally being on the same page with a outside zone runner with an outside zone coach. I mean, things should come into place this year where you should have a better running game. So it could be even better than Ben's last couple of years. You go back to 21 and what happened there. I mean, Ben almost willed them to the playoffs. Certain situations, just taking over games when Canada wasn't drawing it up right. So, this has potential to be even better than late stage Roethlisberger. But that's, of course, if the defense doesn't fall off either. We have to see how that unit plays out here with a lot of guys who are aging. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. This probably in the last 5 years, the Steelers have a shot to have their best quarterback play with Aaron Rodgers under center.
And I look at that and I think that it makes a lot of sense for the Steelers to be in a better situation there. But like I've said, coming into this season, similarly to, I think everyone looks at Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf as the shiny new pieces in the Steelers offense and the Steelers team. I think what's going to be the biggest thing that actually determines how good the Steelers are those early Omar picks that are controlling the trenches. Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, Troy Fautanu, Derek Harmon. Can the Steelers get better in those areas? If the Steelers do, I think they are a better team, and it makes things easier. If they don't, I think that could be the thing that makes them not as good this year. And I think that would be the thing that would be the straw that breaks Mike Tomlin's back in some years' time if they have not developed a new core of leaders and a new cores of really strong young groups. Because by that time, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Micah Fitzpatrick, if Cam Hayward's still playing by then, that's ridiculous. But TJ Watt will be probably out of his prime. Same for Micah Fitzpatrick. And so they will have needed other guys to emerge. And if other guys haven't, that'll be when I think that the Rooneys are like, all right, Mike, thanks for your services. We're moving on here. So but that won't come this year. They're going to give that some more time. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of those other young players that could be developing, especially at the wide receiver position. We talked to Zach Azzani, the Steelers wide receivers coach, last week. He had some optimistic things to say about Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know they also do workers' compensation? When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment's over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? The answer is not great. You got to call Edgar Snyder Associates today, because while insurance company doctors won't be on your side, Edgar Snyder Associates will always be on your side. Call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR, because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights you deserve. That's 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, lots has been made about the addition of DK Metcalf, the sending away of George Pickens, and the potential addition of a free agent wide receiver, or trading for a wide receiver to bring into the Steelers locker room and bolster that position there. But the Steelers have two guys that I think that could develop into interesting secondary pieces behind, or complementing pieces behind DK Metcalf. That's, of course, fourth-year veteran Calvin Austin and second-year player Roman Wilson, both of whom received, I thought, solid commendations for their work from their receivers coach Zach Azzani when we spoke to him. I believe that was last Wednesday during Steelers minicamp. And one thing that Zach Azzani pointed out, and I think he pointed it out a bit louder for Calvin Austin, but he talked about how both of these guys have taken serious steps up, and he mentioned how when last year I told you guys Calvin Austin took a step up, and you saw it in the season. You saw him become a better wide receiver. I'm telling you, it's the same sort of increment. He's basically saying hey, as much as he took a step forward last year, he's taking an even bigger step forward this year. Yeah. And so I think that's interesting, Ray. And I said this all along when people were asking me in live chats and asking about the show. Hey, when do you think the Steelers make a move at wide receiver? I think they wanted to see how good those wide receivers worked with Aaron Rodgers in minicamp, and maybe even for the first couple weeks of training camp. Because if Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, maybe none of them turn into wide receiver 2, but if both of them are really good wide receiver 3s, they may feel the need to be we don't feel the need to go to swing big at wide receiver this season.
Yeah, it's interesting. On shows like this, radio interviews I do all the time, I always get asked, how does Troy Fautanu look coming off the injury? How does Broderick Jones look on the left side, or Derek Harmon? And my answer always is, I'll let you know in training camp, because those guys are linemen, and you cannot judge linemen until you put the pads on. But, Chris, it's a different situation with receivers. And I don't know about you, but I was really impressed with Calvin Austin. I thought he was really good working out of the slot. And, it's interesting. You could pick up things in practice. And Aaron Rodgers was there this past week, and you just sort of see him in the back nodding his head when Austin would, make a catch and run after the catch. I think Aaron likes he likes his skill set. So
right.
I think we have to see how this plays out a little bit. The one reason I do think, though, that they probably have to go out and get somebody else, it's not because I don't think Austin can do the job, but I think Austin at his size, right, like 5'8", $175, whatever he is, he's not your prototypical number 2. So
right.
He's just by definition of how they line up, Chris, he's not going to be that outside receiver. So then you pivot to Roman Wilson. Do you count on a guy who's never done it before? The answer probably is no. That's why I think everyone is putting 2 and 2 together, that they have to go out and get someone. Listen, it might not be a big name, but I think it could be, one of those, a Gabe Davis type or an Alan Lazard type, somebody like that. In the end, come in here, you bolster the depth, and you give yourself options, especially if there are any injuries. If they stand pat and there's injuries to that group, it's pretty much over. That's the reason I have to add.
No, I agree with you there. And that's the thing. I think they will add. They're probably just looking to see what type of receiver do they get. Do they go swing big, or do they go get a cheaper free agent option or a cheaper trade option? If they feel like, oh, you know what, Calvin Austin, want to get him in the mix more, but let's get Alan Lazard to just fill out the back of it. He won't take snaps away from Calvin Austin, but he'll be a guy that can just, help bolster the room for if an injury happens. But one thing I think, too, that could really work out for both Austin and Wilson, both of those guys are speedsters. And I think everyone knows Calvin Austin's a speedster, but a big reason why Roman Wilson propped up in the draft process is because he ran a 4.3 40-yard dash. He was really fast at his combine. And whereas vertical speed is one big thing, having the speed to take the top off a defense, lateral speed going from sideline, going horizontally across the field is also very important. And that's also where getting to the middle part of the field is an aspect. It can really change that part of football. And the Steelers haven't been a middle of the field passing team in some time, whether it's been because of Matt Canada not wanting to do that or not being able to do that, whether it's because Russell Wilson's too short and that's just not his forte, is seeing over the middle part of the field, especially the underneath part. Aaron Rodgers is good at that. And so, like you said, I can see him being like, oh, Calvin Austin, I can think of what we can do here, because Calvin Austin, DK Metcalf called him a jitterbug. He is so quick off the line that if you don't press him, if you don't, just stop him from getting into where he's going, he can break across the middle part of the field on a quick slant, a drag route, anything like that. And then all of a sudden, if Aaron Rodgers hits him in stride and he's moving, now he's a fast moving target that if a cornerback isn't right on top of him, he could turn 3-yard pass into a big gain. And that's something that can really stress out defenses that are either in man coverage or in zone coverage over the middle part of the field. And if Roman Wilson's also similarly, and that's where a lot of his big plays at Michigan were made, were kind of traveling horizontal across the field and getting that kind of separation. If both of those guys are threats like that, those are things that can open up in the Steelers offense that we have not seen for some time.
Yeah, one thing about Calvin Austin, watching him these last 2 years, Chris, is I think he's faster than he is quick. And I think his niche in any offense really is probably going to be dragging across the field in those intermediate or those deep routes. I know where he's not going to be successful, and we saw this with Matt Canada when Calvin was healthy for the first time, putting him on the outside and throwing him back shoulder catches. He's not going to win contested catches. Right. He's not going to be effective there as an outside receiver. What we also saw last year, yes, he was productive, over 500 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns. But when they threw to him short, he didn't necessarily have the quicks to have great run after the catch results when you were throwing to him at the line of scrimmage. He just never really produced in those scenarios. So if you think about his touchdown last year, right, that touchdown across the middle that opened up that game and helped them win, that was against the Chargers, I believe. Yeah, that was against the Chargers where he caught that deep ball over the middle. That's where I think he can be effective. I don't want to say he's strictly a niche player, but I think he's going to be stronger in those intermediate and those deeper routes where he's running across formation. Now, like you said, Chris, I think Aaron Rodgers is really good at that. So that might be a really good fit for Calvin Austin.
So there you have it. We'll see how that plays out and whether or not Austin and Wilson will emerge more in training camp with Aaron Rodgers. Remember, Aaron Rodgers did not do any team drills during minicamp, so we still don't know what exactly that looks like when he's running 11-on-11 or 7-on-7 in the Steelers offense. We'll get to see that in about a month's time, or at least more than a month's time now, month and a couple weeks when the Steelers get to training camp. They report on July 23rd. I want to talk about something else, though, and this involves something about big changes in the league. The league has been trying to find the right formula to make the kickoff interesting but safe. And Danny Smith, the Steelers special teams coach, talked about that last week when we got a chance to talk to him. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you the show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind, step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training. It's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today that's only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're also brought to you by Boss. Boss, of course, brings amazing opportunities for you to find the new best things to wear. If you missed out on Father's Day, they still have a lot of different things to get to celebrate your dad. Head into Boss at the Ross Park Mall to check out all the different things they offer. They have things such as classics. They have anywhere in between classic or timeless pieces that perfectly complement your individuality. Boss Menswear has reached an icon status for its tailoring and offers more than just the perfect suit. So check out Boss today by going to the Ross Park Mall with a selection of menswear pieces only at Boss and Ross Park Mall. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's dip into something that Danny Smith said last week. Now, typically, people don't get that too jazzed about special team stuff, but there is a special teams rule change. And Danny Smith, being the old geezer that he is and the way that he handles things, and he's very much like, don't give me the flash of stuff. Just tell me what we're trying to do here. He has some thoughts here. So let's explain what the quote unquote new NFL dynamic kickoff rule is because that's what they've called it. The new rule in 2025, they wanted to make it so that more teams actually did returns, but also somehow reduce injuries. So this year, they're still doing the thing where the kickoff defense still lines up on the 40. They line up at the 40, 5 yards away from where the offensive kick return guys line up to set up for blocking at the 35. So there's only a 5-yard distance for them. The kicker still kicks from his own 35-yard line, but the goal is to get the ball inside the landing zone, which is from the 20-yard line to the goal line. If it's in the end zone, if it is a touchback, instead of taking the ball out to the 30, they now take it out to the 35. So the idea is, hey, there's not as much space. There's not as much space for guys to collide at high speeds with blocking, with them being 5 yards apart. And also there's an encouragement for teams to want to put it in the landing zone because you probably want to get the ball at the third. You don't want to give the ball to your opponent at their own 35-yard line because you're practically a first down away from midfield at that point. Well, Danny Smith had some thoughts on that, and he kind of just was not about the name, the dynamic kickoff rule. He talked about hey, all this stuff is situational. What's the situation in the game? What's the score? That's what he cares about. He says, quote, "I think we get in trouble in this league when we call it the dynamic kickoff return. Why don't we call it just new kickoff return? We put the term dynamic in it this is going to be something. Well, it wasn't. Let's take the dynamic crap out. Let's call it new kickoff return." And I think we get in trouble when we label those things. So I'm not a guy that uses that term. I don't call it dynamic kickoff return, but with the ball going now to the 35 as opposed to the 30, are people willing to give up those 5 yards or not? That's the decision we've got to make. And like I say, I can't give you a thought in a nutshell. Take me to the situation and I'll tell you what to do. I think that's the best way to play. Ray, the Steelers ranked last, I believe, in kick return yardage. What did you make out of Danny Smith's response over this rule?
Yeah, that's why I think it is interesting for Steelers fans just because of that. The Steelers were dead last in the NFL. They were not good at returning kicks. And, what Danny talked about earlier in that interview was just getting better field position overall for your football team. Like a lot of times we'll look at Danny, he's the special teams coach, but you got to create good field position. If you're the defense, you got to create good field position. If you're the offense, and the special teams just plays the role in that as far as punting or, kicking, and as far as returns as well. So no doubt they got to do a better job with their kickoff returns. We've probably seen the last of Cordero Patterson back there. I can't imagine after last season the Steelers would want to have him back there again. But they do have some options. They got a lot of different guys who can return those kicks. And if teams do want to land it in the landing zone, you have to have a threat out there. And if I'm playing against the Steelers this year, there is no way I'm kicking that ball into the end zone unless
Patterson.
Unless I'm ahead in the game and you're just trying to run out the clock. The Steelers were terrible at kick returns last year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kicking it in the kicking zone, and I'm making the Steelers prove to me that they could actually do a better job this year.
I agree. You got to make them show it. I think part of it too, Ray. The thing is that I am not like people know me. I do lots of X's and O's where I do lots of film studying. Kickoff is one of those things that like there's just some basic elements to it that in the old school kickoff ways that there's not always some big schematic push here. It's hey, make sure if you're on defense, make sure that you're sticking to your lane. When a lane is compromised, that's when bad things start to happen, because that gives the opportunity for the other team to make things happen. There's you can wall off certain areas, but there's ways to counter that. But it's not like a big thing. But with this new kickoff rule, I don't know the full blocking strategy for how this works just yet. I just haven't. It's not something that I've been able to study that closely. I still think the biggest difference, because even with the old kickoff rules back then, the biggest difference was rarely about all this structure or anything like that. It was how fast is your return man? How good is your return man? How does he set up, his blocks and then explode into the seam that he thinks he sees there? That has always been the biggest difference maker. And, to your point, the Steelers had Cordero Patterson doing it last year. Cordero Patterson has had a great career returning kicks and punts. He didn't show it last year. And, we've seen under Danny Smith when kick returns and punt returns have been dangerous because he's had speedsters. Heck, when Antonio Brown was returning kicks and punts for him, he was phenomenal. He was always dangerous to score or get big yards with that. And so I have to think that this year you're telling one of your faster guys, whether it's Calvin Austin, whether it's Jaylen Warren, who's done it sometimes, you want to get a guy that runs a close to a 4.4 flat speed. Yeah. Get him back there. Tell him to protect the ball, but your job is to get upfield and show that we are a threat. If you're the Steelers, that we are a threat in the kick return game, because otherwise, like you're saying, you're just going to keep kicking in the landing zone, and then if you're still just getting the ball at the 20, then you're losing out on this opportunity.
Yeah, I remember last year the discussion this time of year was like special teams coaches like Danny were still trying to figure out, do we want to use big guys back there or do we want to use small guys back there? Because they just really weren't sure how that play was going to develop. But after watching it for a year, Chris, that when we had the old kickoff rule, the ball's in the air, you could actually set up plays. You could have blockers cross the formation, or you could have blockers just go man on man, but you had time to set that up. Now it's such a fast developing play now. It's almost got to be like you said, get your fastest guy back there. It's going to be one cut, get upfield and see if you can make a play. So, to me, it points to guys like Jaylen Warren. I don't know. Maybe you want to use Calvin Austin back there. I'm not sure. You'd be exposing one of your top receivers to maybe more injuries. But if you're in the Steelers' position now, unless some rookie or somebody comes out of the woodwork, you got to get somebody back there who's better at it than Cordero Patterson. Cordero Patterson might have been really good at the old return, but in the sample size we had last year, and let's face it, it's just one season, but it was a full season. He just wasn't very good at it.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, there was never a point in time where you thought, oh, this one might break, because that's the thing is I think you've even seen times where like, hey, you maybe this year you didn't break one, but there was always that threat that, oh, when that guy's back there, something could happen, and there hasn't been that feel from a Steelers returner with Cordell Patterson. But again, they have fast guys. Calvin Austin's fast. Roman Wilson's fast. Jalen Warren could be that guy. Kenneth Gainwell could be an interesting play with his speed.
I forgot about Gainwell.
So like they have multiple guys back there, and it'll be interesting to see who gets more of those shots when we get closer to training camp and we start seeing those practices. But Danny Smith obviously does not have time for naming of it new. He's just like, just tell me that it's a new rule and I'll just work with it. And I think that just shows where Danny's at in his career. He's like, yeah, I've seen 1,000 different things before in my life. I don't need to hear any of this. I love that he called it crap. That was pretty funny there. But hey, we'll see what happens with the new kickoff rule when we get back to training camp. But there's still a lot of angles to this team that are going to cover all week long. We're going to be looking at our conversations with Steelers coaches at several different positions and the coordinators. So if you want to read any of that, be sure to subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com, subscribing, and get all of our work, whether it's myself, Ray Fittipaldo, Brian Batko, and Jerry Dulac. Jerry Dulac also did an amazing job covering the U.S. Open. Shout out to him. All that great coverage can be had at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show, the North Shore Drive podcast, can be found every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those episodes and all the daily content that comes out from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're back here Wednesday with more on the North Shore Drive podcast here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.